Thank you very much, Professor Sen, and thank you very much for inviting me, giving me the opportunity to tell you something about our research into this subject, the mental map of entrepreneurs. Actually, I made a number of handouts. I think I do best to distribute them before I start. I made 25, and I think we are 30 or 35. So there may not be one for every one of you, but maybe some of you can share. Like Professor Sen explained, I'm from the University of Groningen, Faculty of Spatial Sciences. Maybe it's good to give you a little bit of information about that university and that faculty so that you know more or less where I'm placed in the Netherlands. University of Groningen is in the north of the country. The big cities are in the west: Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague and Utrecht. Groningen is in the north. The biggest university of the Netherlands is in Utrecht. 30,000 students, I think, maybe a little bit more. And then there's Amsterdam and Groningen, who are about the same size, 25,000 students. Groningen is older than Amsterdam, I think better, but at least the same size. We just heard an interesting story about the history of Bocconi University. I like to hear that kind of stories. The history of the University of Groningen goes back to 1614, so it's almost 400 years. The university was started in the middle of our struggle against the Spanish for freedom, so an important point in our history. My faculty, the Faculty of Spatial Sciences, is not 400 years old. It's one of the more recent faculties, started right after the Second World War. So we just had our 60 years anniversary last year. We started with geography, later we developed planning, then also demography, and recently real estate studies. Real estate study is in my own department, the Department of Economic Geography. I'm an economic geographer, and like Professor Sen explained, present dean of the faculty. I also served a term as dean in the 1990s, so this is my second time, and I reckon to be the last. So most of my time I spend now is in management, but the real interesting thing at university is always teaching and doing research. And this is, well, my favorite theme. I think I made an agenda of the things I want to address in this lecture. First of all, a little bit of background to understand why we started to do research on mental maps of entrepreneurs. For that you have to know a little bit about how we started with studying firm migration. I have to tell you about our experience in that firm migration research, which is about how migration decisions are very poorly informed, and that is the background for studying mental maps. We've been doing it now for 30 years, which gives an opportunity to compare results over a longer time period, but we also did this research now for more regions, more countries. That gives the opportunity to make a comparison in space. I'm not exactly sure, 1 hour or so, what I can tell you. There's a lot to tell. I have to select, of course, but I want to tell you something about analysis that we did on the data that we assembled in this research, and finally, of course, some conclusions. First of all, then, where we started, firm migration research. Firm migration, firm relocation is a very popular research theme among economic geographers and regional economists. Already since 1960s, 70s, were in fact the heydays of firm migration research. The reason for firm migration research being so popular was that it was a target of regional policy. in many countries, and certainly also in Italy, there was an intention to, well, to try to develop backward regions. And one of the first things, of course, that come into mind if you have well-developed and less developed regions is try to move economic activity from the crowded region to the region where there's a lack of economic activity. So firm migration is a natural target of regional development policy. That's, so to say, a practical background for interest in firm migration. There's also a more theoretical background for the interest in firm migration as a research area. That is because it is such a good source of information if you want to build up location theory. There are, over 100 years, a great number of theories on firm location, classical theories, behavioral theories, institutional theories, evolutionary theories. If you want to build up a theory of location choice, of course you have to start somewhere to get data from practice, and it means you have to go to firms and ask them, why are you here? Now, if you ask such a question to a firm which is just sitting on its place for 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, you may get an answer, but it's not sure it means much. It is much more interesting to go to firms that have recently relocated and ask them, why did you go here? Because then you ask a question that has been something, well, of their real experience. They have been thinking about where to go. So then it makes sense to ask also, why did you go here? If you want to know more about firm location choice, go to relocating firms. That is the message. Now, we started to do a firm migration research in my faculty in the 1970s, doing surveys with questionnaires, interview programs. And one of the things that you very quickly observe if you ask questions about location choice to firms that have recently relocated, is that such decisions not always are very rational. In fact, of 100 relocations, in 50 cases, the entrepreneur didn't think at all about, shall I go here or there? There was just one alternative from the start. And it was a question of going there or not. Only in 50% of the cases, entrepreneurs really are looking at different alternatives for relocation. And if you then ask, why did you choose this alternative and not that one? You quickly perceive that the information they had for making the choice was not very good. Much information that they had, if you try to check it, was false. They missed a lot of information. In fact, it was their perception of reality that led them to make the choice much more than, well, the reality, which they didn't know in total. This is in fact what I concluded already in the late 1970s. Entrepreneurs choose locations not because they are the best, but because they think they are the best. And then if you want to understand how decisions are made, I think you have to try to find out what entrepreneurs are thinking, what is in their mind. You shouldn't look so much at real location conditions as you can find from statistics or other information sources. You should look into the minds of the entrepreneurs. You should look at the map that is in their head, the mental map. In fact, it is Albert Einstein himself who inspired me here. This is one of the things he used to say many times, starting presentations. in his field, which is of course very different from mine, facts are facts, but perception is reality. Yes, indeed, if you are an entrepreneur and you intend to relocate your firm and you think about where to go, there are many facts that of course are of interest. The facts of transport location, the fact of labor market, etc., etc. But in the end, it is the perception of the facts which is reality to the entrepreneurs. So let's try to find out how that perception looks like. That was the inspiration for our first excursion into the map, the mental map of entrepreneurs in the Netherlands. Of course, we started in our home country. In the early 1980s, this was the questionnaire for the first survey we did in this field. Not a normal survey with questions where you can give answers on a pre-coded form, but no, a questionnaire in the form of a map, which is, well, certainly also inspiring for the respondent. It is something different. We always have high percentages of response with these map-like questionnaires. There are 70 locations on the map with the names, so there can be mistakes about which location is which place. And the question is, in fact, suppose that for one reason or another you had to leave your present location and move to another one. In that case, what do you think of these location alternatives? Do you think they would be very good locations for your company? Just good? Well, irrelevant, somewhere in between, I don't know. And then bad or very bad. A 5-point scale of measuring the valuation of a location as a possibility for the firm. This questionnaire was sent out to a 1% sample of all firms in the Netherlands with at least 10 employees in the private sectors of business, so manufacturing, building, transport, business services, wholesale. Not retail, not cafes and restaurants, not government services, just private firms in those commercial sectors. We chose for the somewhat bigger firms, at least 10 employees, because we wanted to exclude the smallest firms that usually have local or regional sales areas. And we don't want the baker in Enschede to answer the question, what do you think about locating in Amsterdam? Because it is not a real option. We wanted only firms in the sample that have at least a national sales area, so where all these 70 possibilities could be an alternative indeed for relocating. There was also a small question added to the questionnaire: is your sales area local, regional, national, or international? So even if we had firms in the sample with more than 10 employees but a regional sale area, we could exclude them from the sample. Well, that was the first time we did it, 1983. You get these hundreds and hundreds of questionnaires back with all the pluses and minuses, and you can then start to add up the results to see what is the most popular possible location in the Netherlands, and that proved then to be the city of Utrecht. Highest number of pluses. Here the city of Winschoten had the highest number of minuses, so we gave that the value 0, and the winner Utrecht the value 100, and all the others were scaled in between according to their score. When we published these results for the first time in the mid-80s, there were all sorts of different reactions. Utrecht, of course, was very pleased with the result and started to use it commercially also. And in Winschoten, which is a small town in the north, they were, of course, not so pleased, and the local newspaper ran a story with the heading, "Foolish Research." Well, understandably, of course. Now, what is interesting is if you look at the scores of the individual cities, you might expect, well, that they were high and low in a very irrespective manner. High here, low there. But if you plot it on a map, you find a very clear geographical structure. If you connect the cities with the same scores, with isolines, you get a sort of height map, like you could have in an atlas, showing where you have mountains and valleys and lowlands. And you see this is a very regular pattern, totally consisting of concentric circles. Utrecht, city number 4 of the Netherlands, very central in the country, being appreciated most, and then very regularly from there the valuation drops. And where I come from, in the north, the values are low. Groningen is over here, so you can see that it's in a lowland beneath the 20 isoline. You get interesting results if you tear the data apart. What you just saw was all entrepreneurs of the Netherlands together said about where you should be in the Netherlands and where you should not be. But if you take the respondents apart, for instance, according to the province where they are from, you get different maps. Here, for instance, you have the entrepreneurs, not of the whole Netherlands, but only the entrepreneurs of this province, the province of South Holland. If you take their answers only, you see that the top of the mountain moves to Rotterdam, so central in their province. Here we have the entrepreneurs from this province, the province of North Brabant, and you can see that the top of the mountain moves into that province. That is Utrecht, so the city, the winner, in the center, and you can see that there you have indeed the center orientation again, but the top of the mountain is much higher. Isolines are much closer, indicating a higher top. And then here in the left right-hand corner, you have the entrepreneurs of Friesland, which is this province. More or less in the periphery of the country, in the north. This is the empty part of the Netherlands. This is the full part, the crowded part. Groningen is here, province of Groningen, province of Drenthe, province of Friesland. There you find the mental map of the entrepreneurs from Friesland, and you see that things go wrong. The top of the mountain doesn't move to Friesland, but, well, is somewhere in between the center of the country and the own province. There's a problem there. What happens here and there is normal and happens in every province. It is what we call a neighborhood effect. It simply means that entrepreneurs think highly of the city and the province where they are. That is normal. That's what you may expect. A neighborhood effect, as we call it, you can also find in residential preference studies. If you get such a map and you have to indicate where you would like to live, you normally start with 2 pluses in the city where you are. Because, well, it would be strange if you would put minuses there. That would create questions. Why are you there then? It's normal to think highly of where you are as an inhabitant, a resident, or as an entrepreneur. And if that effect is not there, something is wrong. In fact, here the entrepreneurs from Friesland are saying, we are in Friesland, but maybe this is not the right province for us. Maybe if entrepreneurs like that really have to reconsider their location for what reason or another, they will also leave the province. So that's a bad sign for the future. In fact, the same sort of map you find for Groningen and for Drenthe. The whole north suffers from the same thing, sort of, well, hesitation about, am I in the right place? This graph illustrates, in fact, what I have been talking about for the past 5 minutes. If you make a graph like this for all entrepreneurs in the sample, connecting how they appreciate a location and what the distance from that location is from where the respondent is residing. You see that they give generally high preferences to the places where they are and the places that are quite near, but that very quickly drops to minuses and double minuses for locations at a greater distance. In fact, 5 is double plus, 1 is double minus. This is the neutral value. So you can see that already at a distance of something like 30 kilometers, generally entrepreneurs are losing their interest in alternative locations. We did this for the first time for the Netherlands in 1983. Later, we applied the same technique for other countries, certain regions of countries, and colleagues copied the approach also a number of times. This is, for instance, Germany. Wim Meester, who was also in my department and wrote his PhD with me in the 1990s, applied the same technique for locations in Germany. Same setup, 70 or so places scattered over the whole country, send out a questionnaire to entrepreneurs in Germany in this case, and wait for the response. And well, now it's getting interesting, because you see what comes up there in such a much bigger country is indeed a different map. There's not one central peak, there are more. The highest peak is here, Frankfurt, but there are also peaks in Berlin, of course, over there, Munich, Hamburg, Osnabrück, Hanover. So there's the first impression that if you go to a bigger country, there may be more than one mountain in the perception landscape. It's also very interesting to show here the differences between the responses of entrepreneurs from North Germany, East Germany, South Germany, but I cannot show you all the details, of course. It's just to illustrate that things are getting interesting if you do the same thing for another country. Here is Hungary, mental map from a research project started by Gabor Kozma, who visited our faculty in the early 1990s and became fascinated with the approach and said, I want to do that for Hungary. So again, a different picture, Buda and Pest, and here close to the border with Austria, a secondary peak. This is Czechia. We had a student who came from Czechia in the 1960s when the Russians invaded, and who came to study with us in Groningen, the time that I was a student also. Later on he went to Amsterdam and came to work there at the university. After 1990 he went back to his home country, became professor at the University of Prague, and well, you keep in touch. And he sent one of his PhD students to us to find out how to do this for Czechia. Well, more or less like the Netherlands, a very clear central peak, but there's a secondary peak as well. Again, different. So you can go on to make these kind of maps for other European countries. That's one thing that we want. In fact, that's what Dario Mussolini is going to do now for the first time for Italy. Very eager to see his results. Italy, again, a large country with a very different structure than, for instance, Germany. But we also did it for smaller regions, like here, the north of the Netherlands. So a map of a part of the country that you show to entrepreneurs only of that part of the country to see what is the most popular location in that part of the country, considering only that context. That was done for the first time in 1986, and we repeated it in 1997 and also last year. So we did this 3 times already. This was the first time. And there I come to this subject of comparisons in time, which is maybe of a certain interest for scientists in general, certainly also in fields like geography, economics. Most scientists do not like to repeat themselves. There's a certain urge to move on, to new subjects, to innovate, like you want private firms to do. Also scientists should innovate and not repeat themselves. On the other hand, by repeating surveys like these ones, you can really make progress in finding out the core problem of a certain question. I think scientists should maybe do more of this sort of research, repeating certain approaches over time to see what changes, because there are interesting lessons to be learned from changes, from tendencies. We have done that for the regional survey of the Northern Netherlands, but also for the national survey. I just showed you the first mental map of the Dutch entrepreneurs, 1983. We repeated that for the first time in 93. Repeating means the same way of sampling, the same selections, firms with more than 10 employees from those sectors. The question, what's your sales area? Local and regional sales areas, those firms are dropped. But the respondents are 100% different. It's the same approach, the same way of selecting, but here we have the mental map 10 years later on the basis of pluses and minuses, maps from individual entrepreneurs, but these are totally different entrepreneurs than the ones who did it 10 years ago. Nevertheless, the same map, exactly the same. The same concentric structure of isolines. So this is a first lesson to be learned. What is in the mind of entrepreneurs is very stable, doesn't change very much. I think this is true for all attitudes that people have. What you feel about certain persons, political parties, types of cars, regions, doesn't change very much. That's what we see here also in the mental map. It is still the same basic thing, the mountain in the middle of the Netherlands, Utrecht, and then the low-lying plain in the north, the northern part of the Netherlands, lying here. If you look very carefully, you see a very small mound over there. That is the city of Groningen. 10 years later again, 2003, same approach, same map. This is why we don't do this every year. There's not so much change, so it doesn't make sense to do it every year. We do it with intervals of 10 years, and well, 2030 is a little bit question, of course, because then I will be 2013, 66, so well, I don't know. Maybe one of my colleagues will have to do it. Would be interesting still to do it once more. Well, I said there's not much of a change, but there is change nevertheless. The basic structure of the mental map stays the same, but if you compare individual cities one by one, of course there are cities that go up in the appreciation of entrepreneurs and cities that go down. And there again is a structure in the going up and down. There's a clear line dividing the part of the Netherlands where places go down in the appreciation of entrepreneurs, and the south, the east, the north, where places go up. This is the comparison between the first and the second survey. Here the comparison between the second and the third. And you can see that the area where places go down more than average is moving a little bit from west to east. Here you have an area surrounded by the dotted line where you find the cities that go down well, relatively fast, more than 10 points on this 0-100 scale. This is more or less the area that we refer to in the Netherlands as the Randstad Holland. Maybe you know the term. This is the horse-shaped form of, well, the city region reaching from Amsterdam to The Hague, Rotterdam, Utrecht over here. So the urban core of the Netherlands, appreciation for that urban core area goes down relatively fast. And the fast declining area is moving gradually from west to east. The interesting thing is that this is more or less found back in the actual pattern of firm migrations. Remember firm migrations as my original source of interest. If you look at the pattern of firm migrations in the same period, that is between 83 and 93, the comparison between my first and second survey, you can see that the arrows also suggest a sort of moving out of this urban core area. You have to be careful by interpreting these maps because they show only part of the story. Firm migrations occur in well, many firms relocate, many more than most people think, but most relocations are local. I think something like 90% of firm relocations are within the same municipality. And only a small part of the firm relocations cross municipal borders. And if they do, mostly go to neighboring municipalities. But a smaller part of firm relocations really leave the original area and go to a real different area, region sometimes far from the original location. Those are the ones that are interesting from the viewpoint of regional policy, where I started my story. And that's the ones you are seeing here. This is the pattern of the balance of firm migrations that cross provincial borders. And then you can see that on balance, firms move out indeed from that urban core area, and later in the 1990s, even more than early in the 1990s. This is interesting because this resemblance between the change in the mental map and the picture of firms that relocate suggests that there is indeed a relation between them. That there's a relation between what entrepreneurs think when they fill out your questionnaire and what they do when they have to relocate their firm. That there's a relation between their, in the scientific jargon, stated preference and their revealed preference. What they think seems to correspond to what they do. And that makes it even more interesting to research these mental maps because they seem to have this relation with what is happening in reality. We are still working on it. This is the pattern of firm migrations later in time, 1999, 2006. Well, this same tendency of moving out is still visible, but I have to admit it has not become stronger, but somehow seems to decrease a little bit. So that's a matter of concern. We are still thinking about what that means. Well, this is the broad sketch of what we are doing. Measuring mental maps by questionnaires asking entrepreneurs to put pluses and minuses on them, doing it again, comparing it in time, doing it elsewhere, comparing in space. But then, of course, you can do very much with these kind of data using all kinds of techniques. Here's a list of techniques that we applied to the data we assembled in this way, trying to find out more, trying to find out what is behind all these data. Trend surface analysis, correlation analysis, cluster analysis, analysis aimed at reducing the distance factor, and factor analysis. Now, I don't have time to show you details of all these analyses. Some of them are very interesting. For instance, cluster analysis, we expected a lot from the cluster analysis. We expected to find geographical clusters, groups of entrepreneurs clustering in certain parts of the country that shared the same sort of views, but we didn't find geographical clusters. The clusters we found were of a very different nature, were like pessimists and optimists, groups of entrepreneurs that, well, belong together because they put many pluses on the map, while other groups of entrepreneurs form groups because they were so negative in their general feeling about locations. I will tell you some more about the trend surface analysis, the distance factor reducing analysis, and the factor analysis. The factor analysis is, in fact, by far the most interesting one. But the trend surface analysis is, of course, about finding well, a mathematical formula that describes a statistical plane, a statistical surface that follows the variables as you have measured them in reality as close as possible. Wim Meester, who did this, found such a formula, a binomial of the 4th degree, I think it was, so x with a 4 in it. And this is the pattern of the statistical surface described by this formula. And then what is interesting are the residuals. This map showing the places that have scored much more than you would expect on the basis of the trend, or scored much less. Maybe that means something. If you can explain the residuals, you are moving towards the truth. It's not so easy, though. You can see, for instance, that there's a high plus here in Rotterdam, which is maybe a city that is felt, or I must say now was felt in the 1990s by many Dutch entrepreneurs as a place having something more than average, which is true, of course. In the 1990s, Rotterdam was world port number 1. So not so strange to have a peak above the trend there. And so you can try to find explanations for the peaks and the valleys in this residual map for other places. Here we have the former coal mining area of the Netherlands in the south. A lot of negative news may explain the minus. Well, this is how we try to find out what may be in the heads of entrepreneurs that explains the mental maps that we measured. This is another thing. This is the graph I showed you again earlier, showing the general relationship between valuation and distance for all entrepreneurs together. And we already said that, well, this is something that you see immediately from the map, that if you separate the provinces, that an entrepreneur fills out the questionnaire like starting with a double plus where he is, and then some pluses around and the rest is minus. So that is a thing that every entrepreneur does. edit for all entrepreneurs explains, in fact, the majority of what you see. Is it possible to eliminate this heavy influence of distance on valuation from what you measure? Is it possible to look at a map without this influence? And then maybe you will see what, apart from distance, is the real feeling that entrepreneurs have about cities. Well, that's possible. That's what Wim Meester did. In fact, he calculated the formula of this relation between distance and valuation for each individual respondent and used it to recalculate the values of the individual respondents and then again put them on a map. Very interesting to see the difference then between the observed ratings and the ratings recalculated for every individual entrepreneur by eliminating the part that is caused by the distance factor. If you look at that map, the adjusted ratings, without the influence of distance, look, it's still in the middle of the country that entrepreneurs like to be. So that is not only explained by the wish to be central, but apart from that, this central part of the country also creates a sort of positive feeling. And look how interesting, the city of Groningen. In the observed ratings map, it is a low part of the Netherlands, but apart from the distance factor, there seems to be a sort of special feeling among entrepreneurs in the Netherlands that Groningen is an interesting city. And it is, of course. It is the capital of the empty part of the country, the only university in that half of the country, while the other 12 are in the Randstad area mainly. So not so strange. There's also a sort of special feeling for this area, which has a sort of tradition of self-sustained entrepreneurial activity. And there's a plus here and a minus here. This may be explained by a lot of negative news that we hear constantly in the Netherlands about pig farms that are noisy and smelly. Well, that somehow creates a special feeling about this area, negative feeling about this province. Well, all sort of food for speculation. Well, I added a series of the adjusted ratings maps to show that the adjusted ratings map is also different for firms from different sectors. But I think I will go more quickly through those. We have them apart from manufacturing, for wholesale firms that very much want to be central, which is to be expected from the sort of function they fulfill in the economy.
Take your time, don't worry.
Yeah? We have time?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, but this is the part I want to spend some more time to explain, try to share my views with you. This is about the factor analysis. Now, factor analysis may be a technique that not every one of you is accustomed to. So maybe I have to explain a little bit about it. Well, there's not a whiteboard here, but let me try to explain it like this. Suppose we are going to do this approach, measuring the mental map of entrepreneurs for Italy, like Dario is going to start in the next month. What you do is offer a map of Italy to entrepreneurs from Italy, showing cities all over Italy, and asking them to put pluses and minuses where they would like to be or not. Now, what you may expect very generally is like what we found in Belgium, for instance, didn't show that the entrepreneurs from the north put their pluses in the north, and their minuses in the south. And the entrepreneurs from the south, vice versa, put their minuses in the north and their pluses in the south. If you put it together to produce the mental map of Italian entrepreneurs, and you add up both parts, you get, well, a rather neutral sort of map with plus minuses all over the country, which doesn't tell you very much. Well, that's what happens, in fact, in this approach. If you take the values indicated by all entrepreneurs from all over the country together, all these tendencies are lost. Sometimes it's easy to find them back, like in this example, because it's rather easy to split up the respondents according to their region of origin. It's very easy to find back these differences. But sometimes it's not so easy. For instance, because you don't know that a thing like this is occurring. In the case of the north and south of Belgium or Italy, well, you know this will be happening. Although you can make a mistake. When we did the survey for Germany, we expected this to happen for the east and the west, which had been apart for 40 years. But it didn't show up in the mental map. So you can be surprised. But the more important thing is that there can be other natural divides in the group of respondents that you wouldn't have thought of. This regional orientation is something that everyone can imagine. But there may be other natural differences between groupings within the respondent group that you didn't think of, and that may explain a lot of what you see. Well, factor analysis is a technique that can indicate these sorts of natural groupings in the respondents that help you to find back groups of entrepreneurs that tend to fill out their maps with pluses and minuses in the same way. Now, it works like this, that you first assume that there is one such factor, then you assume that there are two, then you assume that there are three, then you assume that there are four, then five, and you let the computer, in this case, fulfill the calculation which is needed to find these factors, which are only statistical factors. They don't have a name. We didn't ask for, is this of influence on your decision to put pluses or minuses, or is it important for you? No, we just asked the entrepreneurs to put pluses and minuses. We try now, via the statistical technique, to identify factors that are explaining the variance that we measured, but they are statistical factors. We have to imagine ourselves what they really are. Now, we found that the highest explanatory power, that is to say the highest percentage of the variance that you measured explained by three factors, who together explained something like, I think it was 68% of the variance that we measured. And here you see the maps of the loadings on these factors. Factor 1 has the largest explanatory power, then factor 2, then factor 3. And the pattern of loadings on the factor may be an indication for what you see, for what the factor is like. The first, most important factor shows an opposition between the center of the country and the periphery. It is very much like the original total map, which is not strange because it explains so much from the total variance. Well, it is not, of course, difficult to assume that we see here the factor of transport location, centrality of location, accessibility, on the national scale. Well, doesn't matter what exact name you want to attach to this factor, but it is something like central location. Number 3 is also not too difficult because it presents a clear distinction between what is the urban core area and the rest of the Netherlands. So this must be something like agglomeration. You would expect, also from theory, agglomeration advantage, but we think that what we see is agglomeration disadvantage. Also knowing this story about the appreciation of the locations going down, firms on balance moving out, we think that we see agglomeration diseconomies. This one is the more difficult one, showing a difference between higher values here, and then it declines to the north and west, and here is the really low part. We think, we assume, it is a hypothesis in fact, that this is the residential preference of the Netherlands. This area is the high part of the Netherlands, the sandy part, the wooded part, from landscape values, the more attractive part, while here in the west and the north, you get the lower area, the clay, closer to the sea, the polders, and the big cities where you have problems, all sorts of problems between people, but also on the roads, traffic jams, etc. We think that what we see here is residential preference. I show this for 1993, but the 1993 outcomes were exactly the same as the 1983 outcomes. We not only, of course, compare the total values that we measure in these surveys, but also compare the results of analysis on the data. And the factor maps of 1993, as you see here, were exactly the same as the 1983 factor maps. So we really had a feeling that we have here ground under our feet. These 3 factors very much, we think, explain what entrepreneurs are thinking. They are thinking of terms of being central, being in an environment that is attractive also from a residential point of view, and then you can debate, are they thinking about themselves or are they thinking about their people, their employees? And the third place, there's a certain consideration of no longer wanting to be in the urban area. By the way, this one is interesting from another point of view. If this is really the mental idea of firms of where you are central or not, it's understandable that Utrecht is appreciated much and that it goes down in all directions. But if this is really the factor of being central, the best transport location, then you have here and there the most far away places from the Netherlands. Now, this is of course all on the scale of the Netherlands, which is much smaller than Italy, of course. From north to south and east to west, the country is something like 300 kilometers. So from the north, Groningen, our university seat, to Amsterdam is 2.5 hours by train, which is from the center of Milan to I think the outer urban area. But we are a small country, so we think small scale. So for the Netherlands, for Dutch entrepreneurs, this part of the Netherlands in the north is the periphery, and Harlingen and Delfzijl are the most far away places from the Netherlands, as judged by entrepreneurs. Now for Delfzijl, which is the port city of Groningen, this is true. It is really far from the urban center. You have to go all the way to Groningen, and then there's a secondary road to Delfzijl that is really far away from Amsterdam or Rotterdam. But Harlingen, You may think, why is he so interested in Harlingen, this small port town in Friesland? That is because I was born there and raised, so it's where I'm from. And this is not really far away from Amsterdam. There's a dike here, the Afsluitdijk, built in the 1930s, carrying a 4-lane motorway, connecting Friesland to North Holland. And from Harlingen to Amsterdam is 1 hour by car. This is interesting. You see how entrepreneurs can be mistaken in their mind. They don't think as if this dike was there. They think of Harlingen as a place that you have to reach, going all the way like this. Certain connections that are there in reality are not there in the mind. Great, that's a detail. The same 3 factors in 93. Now the 2003 survey, the 3rd one we did thus far, and we expected, of course, to find the same 3 factors again, and we were disappointed because the factor analysis on the 2003 recordings, although on general they seemed to have the same appearance as before, produced a different result. The factor 1 that we had, central location, seems to be still there. Utrecht in the middle, but a little bit distorted and not the most important factor anymore. The factor of agglomeration, showing the Randstad, is also still there, but now connecting the Randstad with this part of Brabant, which may be explained by the fact that the urban area is indeed growing very much into that adjoining province. But still, it is not the same, and it jumped now to factor 1 position. And factor 2, remember what we had, the residential preference map, the middle one. Well, this one doesn't look very much anymore like that residential preference map. So we were disappointed and had to think a little bit out about what it means. And then we tried again principal component analysis with 4 factors instead of 3. And look, if you try with 4 factors, the factor of centrality to the left jumps back to number 1 position. The factor of agglomeration diseconomy, as we think, moves back to its original last position. And factor 2 splits up into 2 factors. One showing more or less the same area as we had before, which we assumed would be residential preference for the higher and sandy and landscape attractive areas. And another factor 2 showing an opposition of the north and the south, which might well be the same sort of north-south divide we have in Italy and Belgium. In Belgium, the Protestant and the Catholic part, Flemish part and the Wallonian part. In Italy, the economically well-being and backward part. In the Netherlands, north and south is very much about Protestant and Catholic. Below the great rivers is the Catholic part of the Netherlands. To the north of the great rivers, the Protestant part. When we found this, we retried the factor analysis with 4 factors for 1993. Let me see. 4 factors. 1993. Look, if you do 1993 data, also with 4 principal components, like 2003, you get the same maps. Exactly the same. 1993, 2003. And you can hardly tell the difference. 10 years apart, totally different samples, factor analysis, 4 factors, same outcome. So now we think that we are in the right direction again, that it is really these 4 factors, the original number 1, centrality, the original number 3, now 4, well, what people think about being in the urban area or not. And then in between these indications to, well, the more personal things, not so much things that are important for entrepreneurs in terms of location, urban advantages, disadvantages, but personal things. What you think about the religion, what you think about where it is nice to live or not. We tend to think now that we are looking at a sort of fundamental difference between 3 dimensions of how people feel about things, what things mean to people. This is about meaning. And what we have here is a theory about the dimensions of meaning, made up in the 1950s already by Osgood, Susi and Tannenbaum. You can easily find them back if you Google them. Very famous group of authors who also had relations with Festinger, the theory of cognitive dissonance, very much related to this. But for the moment, I think this is the more important thing, that people, if they think about a person, a political party, a city, a car, an acquaintance, a person, what they think of something has always these 3 dimensions in them. The dimension of activity, referring to quick, slow, active, passive. The dimension of potency, big, small, tall, short. And on top, the evaluative dimension, good, bad, ugly, beautiful. This is about dynamism, greater, smaller. The dimension of potency refers to everything that is objective in a sense, that can be measured with a scale, like distance. And this is then the real subjective element. These are the 3 fundamental dimensions found by Osgood et al. And we think we find them back, in fact, in our factor analysis on the data we collect in our measurement of preference for locations, where then potency refers to our factor 1, transport location, being central, where the dimension of dynamism refers to the urban atmosphere, must be the agglomeration factor. And then what we originally found to be the second factor that later on split up in factor 2 and 3, as I showed you, is a subjective element, is where you find feelings that refer to cultural values, like belonging to the tribe of the North or the tribe of the South Italians. In the Netherlands, the Catholics and the Protestants. That kind of more subjective things that have nothing to do with running a firm, but nevertheless are always in the mind of people if they think about places and regions. Also preferences for landscape, liking the atmosphere of a city or a region from a very personal point of view is part of that 3rd evaluate dimension of meaning, in this case meaning of a place, of a region for an entrepreneur. Well, that is the last step before some general conclusions. I think that what we do, try to repeat our approach to different regions and countries, and to repeat them at different points in time, helps us to create hypotheses about what is behind the locational preferences that you record. Of course, you can ask people. I can ask you, why did you choose for the university in Milan? Give me the factors that were important for you. I will get answers, but they will be always distorted by things that are always present when human creatures have to explain themselves. Certain things you don't like to speak about, other ones you are going to underline. For instance, if you have an entrepreneur and you want him to explain why he chose for a certain place, he will not like to speak about his personal residential preferences or his feelings about certain parts of the country that have a certain culture. He will like to explain his entrepreneurial choices with entrepreneurial things. He underlines things that he thinks belong to that. He will be silent about things that don't belong to an entrepreneur taking decisions. I think what we do creates hypotheses about the nature of location factors that escape to that kind of personal colors. Then especially the comparison in space, comparing the results for the Netherlands with what we find in Germany, maybe Italy, will be very important about the generality of what we find. The hypothesis we are building up will be more strong if we can also refer to what we find from data analysis in Italy. I'm very curious. Will we see again, indeed, in Italy, if we are doing factor analysis on Italian data, the same three basic factors? Or will we get, well, new ideas about what should help to explain what we see? It would be very nice if we found, again, the three original factors. But maybe we will get new ideas as well. That's why we are so much interested in Italy as our next case. I really look forward to what we are doing here, and maybe we will get an opportunity later on in the time to explain what we found. Thank you.
Okay, we can open the floor to questions, curiosities. Please, Professor Amatori. He's an historian.
An historian.
I try to be an historian. And congratulations for your presentation. Very well researched and very useful. What I feel a little bit uncomfortable is the fact that you never define entrepreneur. What do you mean by entrepreneur? And this, I think, has an impact on your argument.
Yeah.
Because, as you perfectly know, there are various types of entrepreneurs. There are innovative entrepreneurs, there are Schumpeter, there are replicative entrepreneurs. Because my feeling is that a real Schumpeterian entrepreneur gets out of these maps and he gets where nobody goes. For instance, a case in Italy, we have this important entrepreneur is Leonardo Del Vecchio. He was from Milan. He's one of the most important producers of glasses in the world. He was from Milan, and suddenly he went to Agordo in the Venetian region. For no particular reason, just because of the opportunity that the city financed this project, was not a district, glass district, because the glass district is Cadore, it is not Agordo, it's near Agordo. But the nothing to do, he went there. So he got out of the maps.
Yeah. Okay, I understand your question, and I think you are right that I didn't explain enough what I meant with entrepreneur. I told you, I think, that when we took a sample, every time we take a sample, that we exclude the firms with less than 10 employees, and then again the firms with more than 10 employees, if they answer on the question about their sales area, that it is local or regional, we exclude them as well. I also explained that we exclude certain factors, certain sectors. I didn't explain, and I should have, that we left out the biggest category of firms, let's say the multinationals and their branch plants. We didn't want the headquarters of multinational firms like Philips or, well, any other comparable firm for Italy, or the managers of their big branch plants everywhere to be in the sample, because we thought that would be a really different kind of entrepreneur when it comes to answering the question that we had. First of all, the manager of a branch plant, even if it has tens of thousands of employees, usually didn't make the location decision himself. And if a branch plant is to be closed down or moved or reorganized, again, it is not such a person alone, but always talking with the headquarters that make a decision. In big multi-plant firms, decisions about location, relocation are made in a different way than for small and medium-sized firms. It is a decision not by one person, it is a decision by a management team, usually also assisted by experts, location consultants, etc. So we also left out that category, and I didn't tell that. So what we really have in our sample are the small, not the smallest, small from 10 employees onwards, and middle-sized firms up to, I think we go to 100 or 200 employees, where you can expect that the director is really the person who makes the decisions, and many times is also the owner of the firm. And that is important because we want the plus and minuses maps to be filled out by that kind of persons, where what they think can indeed in practice be translated to a real decision by the same person. So that's what I can say about who is the entrepreneur. It is indeed the entrepreneur of a small or medium-sized firm who is the principal decision maker in such cases as a relocation.
More than an innovator.
He may be an innovator, yes, of course. Or he may be not.
The key issue is the seed, allocation of resources.
Yeah, I heard you mention the term innovator. Of course, you have certain types of entrepreneurs, like you have types of firms. When it comes to types of entrepreneurs, you can think about an innovator or a trend follower or whatever, that kind of types. You have also different types of firms. You have firms, let's say in traditional industries, terms in modern industries, service firms, wholesale firms, transport firms. It's also very different, of course. In our experience, the way entrepreneurs, or managers if you like, decision makers, do not think very differently in terms of where they want to be and why, from one sector to another or one type of entrepreneur to another. If you make up pictures like I showed you, not for all entrepreneurs in the sample together, but for entrepreneurs from manufacturing industry, wholesale, services, the maps are not very different. Also, if you make up maps for, let's say, traditional industries and modern industries, not very different. What we find out here, I think, is rather basic in terms of that it is shared by, in fact, entrepreneurs of all types and firms of all types. The big difference is between the multi-plant style of firm, where decision-making is really different than in small and medium-sized firms. Although we should also be careful with this conclusion, because there is evidence from the Netherlands, from research into relocations of offices, where if you compare relocations of small offices, let's say 10, 20 employees, and relocations of big offices, let's say 200 up to 1,000 employees, that the thinking behind such relocations by the managers is not essentially different. That the bigger companies are not so much more rational than the small ones, no.
I think that his question goes back to the possibility of interpreting location itself as an innovative component of the future of the firm. Probably bigger firms, multinational, etc., choose their location in search for new markets. I mean, where it's not a problem of new products or new activities, but new markets. So it has a component of entrepreneurship, but more on the sales component rather than on the introduction of new products or new processes. Although I think that all the theory of Arrow showing how the propension to risk, in this sense close to what Amatore was saying, leads the choices for location in terms of if I have a scarce propension to risk, if I have a sort of risk aversion, I do locate in agglomeration where agglomeration already exists, rather than investing in new in greenfields areas or.
You're absolutely true. It is one of the things that is neglected too much, that entrepreneurs are in fact always looking for risk-avoiding solutions. They have to take risk, that's the nature of their job, so to speak, but their principal driver is to minimize the risk that you have to take, and that is also applicable to location choices. In practice, it means that firms tend to locate where other firms are, because those are the proven locations. That's where history tells you that, well, things go well. Many firms are there, so that must be a good location, so I want to be there as well. And usually that means going to urban locations. This is a very basic truth. And I don't think that there's a lot of difference between managers with respect to that basic driver. I don't think that you have a category of more risky entrepreneurs when it comes to location choice. Sometimes you see small signs of it in situations where government is offering premiums for location, like in regional policy was usual in, well, let's say the 1960s, 70s, 80s, when location incentives took the form of premiums that were given to firms that wanted to move from, let's say, Milano to Calabria. We have, I know them for the Netherlands, stories of firms that just went there to cash the premium and, well, took certain risks to to get this done. But I think that's something that doesn't occur very much. Normally, avoiding risk is the basic attitude. And I'm still thinking about your category of an innovator, especially because you also mentioned the term again. When it comes to spatial behavior of innovating firms, by my personal view, I don't think there's a big difference between the entrepreneur in what he or she wants in terms of being in location type A or B. But there's another thing which can be found back from empirical studies. Innovating firms tend to be growing firms. Growing firms tend to be mobile firms. Mobile firms generally tend to leave cities. So the idea that many people have that innovating firms will be found in the highest percentages in central cities is maybe not so true as it was 50 years ago. I think nowadays, and it's certainly true for the Netherlands, you find the most innovating firms on the outskirts of the urban areas, in the intermediate zones surrounding them, because innovation produced growth. Growth drove them out of the center of urban areas. They don't want to leave the urban areas altogether because that's what their networks are, but they try to find the places where land is cheaper, traffic congestion is lower, where the living climate for their employees is more agreeable, etc. I think that is what, as geographers, we can attach to innovation.
Yes, Marco.
My comment is very much related to Professor Alberto's one. I don't think that entrepreneurs
Are following?
forward-looking.
Yeah.
So suppose we had a kind of map of actual attractiveness of cities in your sample, and suppose we try to relate this kind of actual attractiveness with mental maps of entrepreneurs, you will have a kind of residual difference in the superposition. You will have some residuals.
Mm-hmm.
These residuals can be related, I think, to two things. The first one is a kind of rational variable, which is the forward-looking behavior of entrepreneurs. So in this case, we will have a sort of map of future. So suppose you have, sorry, I repeat my question. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Sorry. Suppose you have two kind of maps. The first map is the mental map of entrepreneurs, and the second map is the actual attractiveness of the cities in the sample. And suppose you superpose the two maps, you will have a kind of residuals, map of residuals. These residuals can be related to two variables, I think. The first variable is the forward-looking behavior of entrepreneurs. So in this case, the mental map of entrepreneurs is the map of future development of your region or your country. The second variable I'm thinking about to explain the residual is a kind of behavioral variable. I mean, something not much related to congestion or transport or whatever, but maybe what you mentioned in the last slide. So the preference for the beauty, the preference for the landscape. For our Italian, maybe the preference to be located near our mom or something like this. No? So maybe it's just a comment. It's how I feel.
Yeah, I understand your reasoning. When you started your question by saying entrepreneurs will be looking forward to the future, my first impression was to say no. Let me explain that. Of course, entrepreneurs have to look into the future. But the interesting thing is that when it comes to location, they don't. Location is a thing that the average entrepreneur doesn't think about. Now, I think most of you are economists. Yeah? Somewhere in the first or second or third year of your study, you will have had a book about business economics. And if you go through it, looking for the chapter on location, it will not be there. There are, of course, exceptions, and I suppose the exceptions are in this room, but in the long term, economy has been a spaceless sort of science, assuming that, well, the development of the economy has something to do with demand and supply and rates of interest and investment and that kind of thing, irrespective of where it happens. I think this is also true for many entrepreneurs. They don't think much of location. For them it's important what the interest rates is, how demand is developing, and things like that. Location is not an issue. It becomes only an issue when the firm is doing well and growing, and the growth can be accommodated in the present location. Then you have a problem with location, which you have to solve. Then entrepreneurs are starting to think about where should I be. Normally they don't. That's where it is interesting also for my sort of person. After the move, asking why did you do it? Normally, well, you would get an answer, but it didn't mean very much, and now they haven't really thought about it. But that was not really your question. Your question was about can the pattern of feelings about places be compared with the pattern of production, and can it maybe somehow tell you about where in future production will be realized, maybe on other places than now. That is very close to my own intentions, I must say. This research line of explaining spatial choice behavior, also related, as I explained, to the issue of industrial relocation, is undertaken within the program of what we call firm demographic research in my faculty. Firm demography is in fact trying to observe and analyze and explain the development of a population of firms in the same way that a demographer would do that for a population of people. And the real interesting thing is, of course, to prophesy, to say something about future developments in the population of people. Will it grow? Will it decline? What categories will grow or decline? You want to know something about the future of the population. That's what you have demographers for. What we try, in fact, is to do the same, but then for the population of firms. And what we are really interested is not only in the size of the population, but much more, in fact, in the spatial spread of that population. Can we, from the trends that we see in the startup of firms, in the migration of firms, in the death rate of firms, in the rate of firms join, comparison with birth, growth, death, marriage, etc., in populations of firms, can we say something sensible about what the population of firm looks like, let's say, in 10 years' time, and where the locations will be, where they are coming, asking for space, asking for land. for that you also need to understand why they have interest in certain locations and lose their interest in other ones. That's why we are digging into this mental map business to find out what explains where they are moving to, what locations are that are left, that are sought for, because that would be a very important thing for government to know. Maybe the situation in Italy is a little bit different, but in the Netherlands, locations for firms are developed by lower governments, by municipalities. They make land use plans. They make plans for business sites, industrial sites to be developed at certain places. And there's a sort of gambling in that. You don't know exactly what the demand for space will be, but the closer you can come to what the real demand for space will be and the places where the demand will be, the more you can avoid to develop land which is not used, so that will create a lot of cost to society. And well, maybe you can also try to guide a little bit the process of choosing locations by not offering too much land on all sort of places, which is now happening on the location market, which in fact is a market where the buyer, the location chooser, has a lot of options. He can go everywhere. He can have a game with all the regions and all the cities that have land to offer. Maybe we should make this a more scarce thing on the market. But then we have to know more exactly where we should offer locations and not. For that you need to know what is behind the choices that entrepreneurs make in practice. So what you ask is in fact very close to what we want to reach in the long term.
Yes, I have two more questions on this last point. First of all, a curiosity. Have you ever checked for a sort of correlation between natality rate and relocation rate? Because this is a very interesting question, or say in a different way, mental maps of new entrepreneurs are the same or are different from already existing entrepreneurs that are moving on the territory. And the second one is, what about policy? I mean, to what extent policy modify mental maps? When you look at the decade time span, you can account for a policy effect in the moving of the relocation trend.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting questions. Your first question about have you checked whether mental maps are different for starters and firms that do exist longer. I think we never did a real check on the age of firms. You make me think about that. Do we have that in the Italian questionnaire? A question about when was the firm founded? Yeah? Yeah, because that would be a good idea indeed. If you know the founding date, you can indeed check, are older firms different in their thinking than younger firms? I can't say too much about it. But what I can say is that starters, so let's say firms that exist 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years, I think they don't have a mental map at all. I have to explain that, of course. If you start a firm, you have to solve all sorts of problems. where do I find the money? Where do I find the clients? Where do I find employees? Finding a place is usually for a starting firm not an issue. Thinking about where shall I start is a thing that doesn't occur in the mind of the average starter. A starter starts where he is, in Milan or in Torino or in Amsterdam, and usually when he or she starts, there's also immediately an idea where to start. In the house, in the shed next door, or in the part of a building that an uncle or so has to offer. It is not the main problem. The main problem is a problem of finding money, people, markets. Now we know that after 5 years, half of the starters will no longer be there. That's a thing we know also from firm demographic research. After 5 years, 50–60% of the starters is gone. The 40–50% that are still there are the winners, are the ones that have survived the starting period, are doing well, and will be starting to grow. And that's where the location problem pops up at the horizon. After 5, 6, 7 years. On average, you can say that a starter will feel the problem of growth, the need to find another place. That's for the first time that where becomes an issue because it is related to a problem that is related to the existence of the firm itself. I think only from that point onwards, and certainly after a first relocation, it makes sense to ask questions like we do. And then whether the mental map of a 10-year-old firm differs very much from the mental map of a 100-year-old firm is maybe not the most interesting one, because the 100-year-old firm will not have a manager that has been there all those 100 years. You would expect that a firm that exists so long will have more location experience in the sense that it had moved a number of times in the course of its existence. Now this is a very interesting thing maybe to mention. There is Aleid Brouwer, who was a few years ago one of my PhD students. Next to her, Ilaria, also one of my PhD students from the past. Aleid did a study on old firms in the Netherlands. What she found out was that the oldest firms, 150 years and more old, which you would expect to have a richer location history, are more than average on their original location. It makes you think, but it's only a sideline. The second question was about policy. What's the relation with policy? There are several relations with policy. I started with one, and I think you referred to that one with your question. Firms that tend to relocate, think about where to go, might be influenced by policy measures. That was the thinking of the 1950s, 60s, 70s. And the original idea in many countries was that that was a logical sort of thinking because it proved to be effectful. In the Netherlands, we had a period in the 1950s, 60s, early 70s, where we had incentives for firms moving to the outer parts of the country, and we saw firms indeed moving there. And I think Italy has the same history, has a famous history within Europe when it comes to redeveloping the Mezzogiorno, where indeed also many cities thought to be, indeed to profit from incentives that brought big firms there, to Bari and Tarente, etc. Later on, much more doubt grew about the real success of this relocation stimulating policy, because more and more studies have shown that the movement of firms from national peripheries from natural agglomeration, central areas to peripheries was not so much driven by the policies, what politicians liked to think, but was driven in fact by the wish by the firms themselves to find locations where unskilled, cheap labor was still available. It was in fact driven by the labor market. 10, 20 years after the Second World War, in the urban areas, it was, well, more and more difficult to find people for low-skilled production work. That's where the outmigration to the national peripheries started, and the in-migration of guest laborers also started. But we have seen that in later decades, that outward shift just moved to more faraway destinations, to the north of Africa, to the south of China, Southeast China, the Philippines. So the success of the policy can be doubted. It was a sort of natural happening, and policy had less influence than politicians wanted to think. There's a other side of the same medal, that such policies of stimulating areas lagging behind can have negative effects when it comes to what I have been speaking about, the image of places and regions. The north of the Netherlands, the low-lying plain on the mental map, definitely has a generally bad image among Dutch entrepreneurs. And of course, I have been arguing what the main factors behind that image may be, but I tend to think that government policy is also a part of the story. The north is the only region of the country that has been assisted with all sorts of regional policy incentives for over half a century. Now, I think it is only natural that this has had a certain impact on the thinking of entrepreneurs. A region where they give you so much money for going, that something must be wrong. I think the feeling that it is a distant region, factor one, is very much stimulated by this constant helping of the region, creating also the image of a faraway place where you wouldn't go if you didn't get some sort of stimulus. Maybe the same could apply to the north and south of Italy.
Just a bit louder. One question. I haven't understood well what you have done with branches. So branches are excluded.
Yeah.
Right. And my question is related to this. Is about the size. I mean, are these results weighted by size, or these are just straight numbers? Because the question is, my impression is that for several firms, size matters. There are a lot of small firms that are, that are born very close to big firms, simply because there is a lot of business that trickles down out of big firms. Mm-hmm. So, if this is the case, then the locational choice is actually, locational choice of the big firms, because the others are just followers.
No, I don't believe that. We didn't check for age, as I just explained, but we did check for sector and size.
Right.
We left out indeed the small firms. We left out, let's say, the biggest firms, meaning most of the time also firms that are part of multi-plant organizations. So what we have are firms between 10 and let's say 100 or 200 employees, middle-sized firms. But within this category, there is definitely no difference between what is in the minds of the smaller and the somewhat bigger firms. And the same, no difference between firms in one sector or another. Small differences, but not really fundamental differences. This thinking in terms of wanting to be central having a preference for where you are, the basic factors behind it, location, residential value, agglomeration, are the same for all. They are sort of basic feelings in the mind of an entrepreneur, irrespective of him or her being a starter or an experienced firm, a big firm, a small firm, a wholesale firm, an industrial firm. I think the difference that you would expect will become visible if you are questioning entrepreneurs in what I feel is the more old-fashioned way that is always done by many consultants, giving them a list of factors that you invented, 20 factors ranging from different aspects of infrastructure, different aspects of labor, different aspects of government rules, etc., etc., etc. You have these lists of 10 factors, of 20 factors, of 100 factors. There are so many. If you put them before an entrepreneur and say, indicate the 10 most important ones, yes, then you will find the differences that you could expect, and you will indeed also find. But I'm not interested in that. Those are the things I know. What I want is to find out what explains their gut feelings, where they want to be or not, and what is really behind that. I want to have the basic dimensions of what a place means to an entrepreneur. And that is what we are searching for, if that's an answer.
To consider they are put very fast. And this decision can, the answer can affected also by many variables, as the month after holiday, and so I answer Palermo because it's very nice village at the moment. I arrive here 1 hour later for the traffic. And so on. How do you consider that?
Well, starting with the last part of your question, of course you're fully right. The atmosphere of the moment. Are you feeling well or not? Your experience of yesterday. I went to Amsterdam, bad weather. I went to Reno, traffic congestion. Of course, those kind of experiences will influence your answers on the questionnaire we produce. That's why it is so important to not only speak with 5 or 15 or 50 entrepreneurs, but to have a wide sample of, in fact, many thousands that you address, and well, something between 500 and 1,000 that you will get back in the multitude of respondents. You hope that these things will vanish, but also that's why we want to do it again, 10 years later and again 10 years later, compare it between regions, between countries, to be more sure about what are the basic dimensions. I think that's how we get away from the problem that you mentioned. It's exactly why we want to do it in this way, and not like a one-time sort of analysis. Let's see what we find, and that's the truth. No, I want to do this in the long-term perspective and in the perspective of comparing regions. So I think that's an answer to your second part of the question. The first part was about that it is a decision that involves, well, a lot of money, you said. It's an important sort of decision, and I fully agree with that. It is not a sort of decision that is taken lightheartedly. it is not a sort of decision that entrepreneurs like to make at all. In fact, they try to avoid it. There we are back again with the risk avoiding behavior. And it also explains why entrepreneurs do not plan this very carefully, which they could. I mean, when it comes to firm growth, the firm policy of innovation, that kind of things, entrepreneurs tend to think ahead, tend to make plans. When it comes to location, they are not. They don't think very much about location normally, I said it already. And it is certainly not a thing they think of in advance, which they could. I mean, a firm which is growing can expect that in 1, 2, 3 years' time you will have to move. And it means that it would make sense to think about it in advance. They don't. Every time you attach interview programs to the sort of surveys we do, and believe we have talked a lot with entrepreneurs, especially the moving kind. Every time again you find the same thing. They didn't plan anything. It was something that, well, all of a sudden the problem was so big that they had to do something. It is not really a part of their strategic planning. Yeah, maybe that also explains why feelings and perceptions have such a big influence on the decision. They don't take a lot of time to consider. They don't hire consultants. Yeah, the multi-plan type of firm, they do. But the average entrepreneur of a small or medium-sized firm doesn't. He knows that it is important, that it is a thing that will cost money, also because of the loss of production. You have a period when you move that you cannot produce. So that is maybe the biggest loss in the whole process. They are certainly aware of that, but it explains, in the first place, the postponement of the decision, and then the somewhat overhasted sort of decision that is taken afterwards, not looking at more alternatives. Like I said, 50% of the firms that moved, where did you go? From Harlingen to Franeker. Were there alternatives? No. We know more or less from the start, we knew that if we had to move, we would go there. Solve the problem as quick as possible, a satisfactory solution, okay. Nothing like looking for the best location, like the neoclassical theories told us. Entrepreneurs are not optimizers, they are satisficers. If there's a problem, they quickly look at a satisfactory solution. Also when it comes to location, we have to solve the problem as soon as we can, so we don't lose production, we don't lose time, we don't lose money. And the not wanting to lose money is also a very important thing in the final discussions with the municipal governments. If you look at that side of the decision story, the decision is always sort of process. In the first phases, if they are thinking, they are really thinking about location conditions. But once location conditions being comparable, once you have a short list, 2, 3 possibilities, and you enter the discussions with local governments, it's all about money. It's about the cost of the land, which is nothing in terms of the, the price of the product, let's say. It's it's an event that you don't have every year going to a location. You do that now and you intend to stay there for 10 years or forever. So it's not a thing that is found back in the production, in the price of the goods or services you produce. But nevertheless, in that phase of the decision, it's all about money. It's all about trying to have this game between one municipality and the other, who then try to offer their land as cheap as possible, sometimes even for nothing, as if the location was really worthless. It's a very interesting part of the story. which is not part of this research line anymore. But when you mention the problem of it's about money, yeah, it's about money, especially in that final phase, and partly not really about an important sort of money for the entrepreneur, because the price of the land is such a minor thing in terms of the price of the product produced. But it has a lot of consequences when it comes to the location market, and indeed to the offering of too much locations for too low prices by the municipalities. Is it the thing you recognize for Italy? Yeah? Not? No.
I think we can leave, we have time only for one more question, then we stop the seminar. If there are no questions, I want to make a very last comment. I think going back to the sentence of Einstein that you cited, I think it's your contribution is very interesting. I took a lot of notes because actually perception is reality, in the sense that for instance the role of information in affecting the location decisions is crucial. The role of marketing policies, urban or territorial marketing policies, is essential, not in the sense that they rank the places, the most interesting places, but in the way they affect the perception. I think that Michele Scarpinato's question on the effect of the, let's say, theoretical maps on the basis of what is my perception in theory, and what is my perception once, or what is my decision when I have to take the decision, and how I view the space in general. I mean, I'm thinking of Italy. I think this is very relevant. So, in a way, your approach is really revolutionary in terms of what the location theory is, because location theory, I'm thinking of Weber, Lösch, and
exactly.
the founders of the location theory are people who conceived or framed the location theory as if the location decision was taken before the birth of the city, of the firm, yeah. Which is not the case. I mean, there is no such decision as by somebody who wants to establish a new firm, but only of somebody who has a firm and is considering alternatives or views the situation. I think Alberto Bramanti's question was the new entrepreneurs and the relocators. It would be interesting to see what the mental map is of those who have ideas of the idea of establishing a new firm, but actually this is not concrete. I mean, this is only theoretical. Nobody takes the decision of should I open a new firm? Where should I go? I mean, this process is, I'm not saying non-existent, but very rare. I mean, this rationality, the lack of rationality that you were hinting to, I think is a real problem. New entrepreneurs or firms are not rational in their location theory, and they are more, they follow more the perception or the instinct or the relationships or the taste for some amenities rather than for others in terms of. I think that again the seminar is quite interesting. Some of us will continue with Professor Pellenbarg today to work with him to see what we can actually conceive as research projects in collaboration between Groningen and Bocconi, because I think that most suggestions were quite appealing. So I thank again on behalf of everybody, Professor Pellenbarg, and I thank you all for your presence.
Thank you.